Hello.
Hello.
Hi
Hi.
everyone. Welcome to Singapore Geospatial Festival 2021, an event that brings the international geospatial community, the private and public sectors, as well as the community at large together for the co-located activities promoting the use of location-based and mapping innovation. So this event is organized by GeoWorks, Singapore Land Authority's Geospatial Industry Centre. So today we are excited to have our panelists and moderator to share with us more on the catalyst for Earth observation. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please leave them in the Q&A chat box and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. So thank you, and without further ado, I will hand over to our moderator, Mr. David. Mr. David, please.
Hi, a very good afternoon. If not, perhaps good morning to some of you in different parts of the world. Yes, I'm David Tan, the Executive Director for the Office for Space Technology and Industries here in Singapore, hosted here over at the Economic Development Board of Singapore. I'd like to begin this afternoon with a famous quotation from the Star Trek Captain James Kirk, who once said that space, the final frontier. I think in the past, when we look at these words, it begs the question of how do we then reach and breach that frontier, that heavenly frontier that mankind like us could be there. Isn't space the domain for the rich, the powerful, and the famous? I think not anymore. The world indeed is already, I think, at the dawn of what I call the new space economy, ready at the edge, or even perhaps at the start of a liftoff. In fact, Morgan Stanley published that the estimated 350 US billion global space industry could surge to over 1 trillion by 2040. And at least 60% of them are commercial. Let me just say a few words about the facts concerning space, which is important. Traditionally, when we think about space, we are thinking about building the launching of a satellite to collect data and to enable comms, and that will cost hundreds of millions of dollars. I know this because Singapore experienced that before. It's huge. The satellite typically will weigh about maybe perhaps 6 tons, up to 6 tons, with the size of a bus. And that would be sent up into a geostationary orbit about 35,000 kilometers or higher above the Earth. But today, did you know that you could send up a so-called nano satellite weighing just 25 to 50 kg, my weight, 50 kg, into low Earth orbit about 1,000 kilometers above Earth. And you know how much it will cost? Maybe perhaps no more than 1,000 or 100,000 to 1 million US dollars. Launch prices are falling. And because technologies are also pushing, the technology giants are driving demands. And this makes low-cost small satellite constellation to be cheaper, better, and outperform the bigger ones. It's designed to collect optical, radar, maybe hyperspectral, thermal spectra, and even multispectral imaging, a reality and at a cost that mankind could afford. So the market is also making its move. And as I look at the industry, as I look at the market, I realize that the analytics derived from multi-source data are also driving the shift in revenue generation from imagery to now what we know as satellite as a service. And these are opening up a whole Pandora of applications with the breadth, the height, and the depth. In my humble prediction, I think local-based services and financial services will continue to be the first industries to benefit from faster access to this low-cost data in a market previously dominated by government customer. So this afternoon, we are also privileged to have a panel of distinguished practitioners and movers of satellite-based users and pushers to engage in this moment of my share for the next 60 minutes on the topic Catalyst for Earth Observation. Let me now introduce them one by one. You need to know them so that you know that you are among giants who are holding space by the hand. First and foremost, Mr. Abhay Swarup Mittal, the CEO of EOFactory.ai. He's also the Chief Executive Officer of SkyMap Global Private Limited here in Singapore. Mr. Mittal's main focus was to develop businesses across the region by delivering operational solutions to customers in the geospatial domain. Under his leadership, SkyMap Global has grown to become one of Asia's leading providers of satellite imagery, data solutions, and location analytics with regional presence in Singapore, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines. Visionary in nature, Mr. Mittal is investing in R&D and building next-gen analytics and information products using machine learning and automated tools. SkyMap recently launched a GeoAI-based EOFactory.ai. Sounds exciting. It is a cloud platform which has reached more than 3,500 online and still counting within a 1 year span. So Abhay, yes, we welcome you. The next on the line is Mr. Clinton Debay, the Managing Director for Kumi Analytics Private Limited. Clinton has been in the mapping industry for more than 25 years. He still looks young, and early in his career, he helped create the first global satellite imagery browsing system and the first high-resolution satellite imagery international joint venture. Later, while at the first American Core Logic, he led the creation of a very interesting multi-hazard monitoring system for the insurance and banking industry. And over his career, he has helped a range of industries to take advantage of the emerging locations intelligence industry. Prior to starting Kumi Analytics, Clinton was at Microsoft and then Google, where he held several roles, including the head of utilities for the America, global strategy, head of business development in the US, and most recently, the head of business development for APAC. Next on our list is Dr. Motoyoki Arai. Dr. Moto is the founder and the CEO of Spective. He began his career working at a US-based consulting firm in Tokyo, Japan for 5 years. During that period, he supported more than 15 global companies in designing new business and technology strategies that could formulate corporate governance in order to build the internal controls necessary to run global companies. He had received his PhD in technology management for innovation from the University of Tokyo. And during his time there, he focused his research on constructions of energy systems to promote economic growth in developing countries. He then implemented his knowledge of business development to solve social issues in areas such as energy, water, sanitation, agriculture, and recycling in Saudi Arabia, Bangladesh, Laos, Cambodia, Kenya, Tanzania, and devastated areas in Japan. Sounds like quite a fair bit of social enterprise, and so we also welcome Dr. Moto. Finally, we have Ms. Yana Gavoyan, the Secretariat for the Director for the Group on Earth Observation Secretariat. Yana joined GEO as the Secretariat Director in July 2021, and she's an international relations expert whose career spanned from humanitarian relief, God bless you for all that you have done, and as well as development, international think tank, and government organization. Formerly, she was the GEO Program Manager at the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, called NOAA. And Yana managed the participation of the United States government in GEO and provided thought leadership to shape forward-looking strategies and policies that are important that will enable multi-sectorial partnerships, broad stakeholders, engagement and sustainability, and the deserved recognition of GEO's most valuable assets, its community. I think we know that we would be wasting our time this afternoon because we are really among a highly illustrious panelists. So let me just begin now to maybe push it up to the next level, and that is to just to engage the panelists. For the first question, I would like to hear from all of them, their views. First question is that, space-based, as I've said, space-based satellite constellation capabilities expands the capability for the next generation of comms, navigations, and global awareness that touches our lives. What, in your professional views, are the key motivating drivers, including challenges and opportunity in this space age? Maybe we have the ladies to start. Yana?
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. I quite enjoyed that opening that you provided. It's really my pleasure to be invited to this panel and be among the colleagues. Indeed, it's a first panel on Earth observations, as I understand it. Usually these events are about geospatial. So I really appreciate the efforts of the organizers to feature Earth observations as one of the critical integrated pieces of what we otherwise refer to as geospatial. We can go back several decades to when governments, and not only governments, have accepted and recognized as the environment and our natural resources as the base of our economic and social development. And what does that mean? For us to be able to protect our environment then becomes the key element to ensuring vitality sort of on Earth for our citizens, for our future. To protect the environment means to understand it. To understand it means to monitor it. And that is really what our agencies have done for several decades. Public agencies first, then also with participation of the larger commercial providers. And now, as you, David, pointed out, a lot of private space-based observation providers, space-based assets operators, who have all entered into the space of operating satellites to monitor the Earth. And really the data that's coming online is fascinating. The quality of it is unprecedented. And all of that is very exciting. I love to get online. I love to see all of the sharing by the companies of the tools and the data analytics that they bring online. For us here in GEO, we serve the community of governments who have the ultimate responsibility for the well-being of their citizens. So we in GEO always like to approach the question from the perspective of how this is going to be benefiting the communities of citizens. And what can we do to ensure that this goods of this fourth industrial revolution in the era of which we all live and operate are in fact making an impact where they're most needed. And that usually means the most vulnerable communities, small island development states, the least developing countries. So for us in GEO, the catalyst for these partnerships is the full realization of the urgency with which we need to be enabling smart policy decisions and sustainable development that takes into account both the need to increase agricultural production in some place, but also manage the use of water resources. So the difficult questions that the policymakers, and not only policymakers, but also businesses need to be answering using this wealth of observations and analysis that is available to us today is what's driving our efforts to partner with the private sector, but always with the view of how are we really ensuring democratizing access to these riches in the parts of the Earth where the need is the greatest and the capacity is the smallest. So I'll pause here to see where this conversation takes us.
Well said, Yana. I think, your heart of the organization for people and community is at the forefront. And I think that's important, and to be able to enable smart policy decisions to make sure that, no one is left behind. I think that's great. Yes, let me move over to Dr. Moto, maybe for his perspective take on this.
Thank you for introduction, and I'm honored to join this panel discussion. So SgGeoFest is a satellite data solution provider with our own radar satellite constellation. So currently we operate radar satellite in the orbit already and provides data solutions, several data solutions for infrastructure development and the disaster risk management field. So I think it's very good timing to establish these companies. Actually, so I established SgGeoFest 2 years ago, and as David mentioned, the space relevant technology have become, I think, matured compared to the 10 years ago. So the many small and micro satellite, so our satellite is also 100 kilogram. So it's heavier than us. So, but it's also a very small one. And radar technology is very difficult to achieve for commercial players, but so we did it. And several radar satellite operator already start to provide their data for the governmental users. It's a traditional market, and also analytics company is emerging market. So I think this shift, not expanding the market, is the essence of new space trend. So as I said, the governmental user is traditional data user for satellite operator, but industrial user try to use our satellite data solution for their usual operation, but they don't have enough capability to understand the data. It's very huge, it's very complicated, and there are so many remote sensing technologies, so they cannot cover all of them. So that's why SgGeoFest provides solution as well, not only the data, but information through analytics. So it's very important to expand the new market for industrial sector, and it's also challenging point. David mentioned also commercialization. So I think it's the biggest challenge for all of the satellite operator and the analytics company, because satellite data sounds very far from the usual business operation, but it's just one of sensing tool in orbit. So it's kind of the IoT sensor in orbit. So we always say that. Maybe the new users, industrial users, should used to utilize this new data, and through the solutions use, and in parallel, the solution provider, try to demonstrate many use case with our own satellite data, and also with the data science and the machine learning technology is very appropriate for analyzing the huge data comes from the satellite constellation. So we already have these two new technology to provide the new information and insight for the new industrial sector. So for us, infrastructure development sector and a disaster mitigation sector as well. So it's the mix industrial user and maybe public user. So I think that's the improvement of the usability, and the commercialization is a challenging point for the new space business players, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moto. I think you're in the right business. You use the word new data, new industry user. I think that is important, because as you expand the orbiter observation space, you need to be able to handle more data beyond fusion to bring what I call the actionable insights for everybody to use them. So on this note, if I may invite Clinton to share his perspective on this question about, the key motivation drivers, challenges, and opportunity in this new space age. Clinton.
Thank you, David, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this panel. It's very, very exciting to be part of this. One of the things that when Jana was talking, I just would like to build on a little bit further, and that is the true understanding of the planet. And in order to help those on the planet, requires us to, if you really want to understand something, you need to be able to measure it. And a lot of people will say it's a small world. And I often joke around about that and say it's a small world until you want to paint it, or you want to collect the imagery for the entire world at high enough resolution where you can really get some good insights. And when I start thinking about the opportunity in the market and for the human population across all countries, whether they're in major industrialized nations or more smaller countries that don't have as many resources, one of the biggest challenges is access to the data, right? And I think the governments have been very good in doing that. It's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is the government not competing with the private sector and encouraging the very strong private sector, but at the same time, the private sector understanding the importance of making certain data sets available for the benefit of mankind. And one of the ways that I think that this can be achieved is by offering some data sets to industry from the private sector to enable the development of new applications. And the government platforms have been very successful in doing this over the years, and is responsible very much so for the global satellite industry. If I go back to the early days, for me, it was when I started, I'm just shy of 30 years, so I need to update my bio. I was very fortunate to work with one of the inventors of digital image processing. He worked on the unmanned spaceflight programs at NASA and built the first image processing system for them. And what he always used to say is there's tremendous value in satellite imagery, and there's so much data inside of it. We just need to figure out how to get it out and make it available and useful for people that don't need to understand the satellite imagery. And the terminology is unsupervised classification. Once we can create methodologies to be able to identify what's in the imagery without having to do it on a manual basis, which now we would call machine learning, that's where we will get to a point where we can start to realize the benefit from this technology. And if you look at like what Moto is saying in terms of the new applications and new users as well, and you combine that with unsupervised classification, you combine that with the cloud infrastructures available and all the new platforms being launched, that's really where the opportunity is. And that's part of the reason why I left Google, which is a tough place to leave, but I sort of thought there was the time to do it, because I saw these technologies converging from unsupervised classification / machine learning, just a tremendous number of new satellites getting launched, significant importance in understanding the Earth as it's changing, given all of the recent news that we're seeing and the various disasters happening and changes in the world. And then you look at all of that together, and there's a tremendous opportunity. Now, at the same time, we need the tools, and we need to understand at a higher level how to take those assets and make them available to people in a very easy to use fashion. And a good example I like to talk about is hyperspectral imagery. So people will talk about multispectral. When you start talking about hyperspectral, you can have hundreds of bands. And it's sort of like putting on a pair of glasses, and the glasses are designed so that you can tell if there's gold in the hills or if there's pollution in the water. You just put on a different set of glasses, and that's really where hyperspectral data will start to give you those type of capabilities. But it's a lot more difficult than just putting on a set of glasses, right? And so what we need to do as an industry is work with these types of tools and make those data sets more easily accessible to users at the point where they can actually make business decisions. So, what we don't want, there's an expression of pictures worth 1,000 words. But the funny thing is, what we do is we take that picture and then we turn it into 1,000 words again. And so how do we actually take that imagery and create a derivative product that allows someone to make a decision, yes or no, we should do one thing or another, and how to actually make business decisions or social decisions as to what we should do, whether it's important to balance the two. Should we develop an area, or is that going to cause a heat island in the middle of Singapore, for example? And these are the types of decisions that are going to drive the survival of the human race in many ways, as well as the prosperity of the people, and whether or not there's food or water. A lot of these decisions have significant impact. And if we can measure, going back to the beginning of what I was saying, if we can measure the impact and understand it fully before we start making some of these decisions, that's going to give us a much better position in order to achieve our ultimate goal, which is to have everyone to be prosperous, healthy, and live a fruitful life.
Thank you, Clinton. I think it's well said. I like the way you said that we must be able to measure, and after we can measure it with empirical data, it's a data-driven approach. We must be able to make it accessible. But it's one thing to make it accessible. It's quite another thing to make it affordable. And I think this is the challenge that we are having, and that's the conversation that we must have in order to ask ourselves how do we create a catalyst for this Earth observation that can benefit the people of this world. So on this note, I am going to ask Abe for his perspective. He comes from the democratization of AI. So perhaps he can lend his perspective.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I'm really honored to be here. And I think GeoWorks is doing a great work in putting these panel discussions and bringing people like yourselves, David, Yana, Dr. Moto, and Clinton. And I'm sure there will be more people in the audience also who can also contribute to panel discussions and sharing their ideas. So, I've been looking at this industry from the first quick bird, which was like one satellite, and people were using that data. You could use that data. In this industry, if I were to actually compare this to TV industry, so in 1990s we had the TV and we had maybe 5 channels, 10 channels, and we used to be really enjoying those channels, whether it is agriculture based or anything. So there used to be very few channels, very few programs, and people were happy with it. Then suddenly there were so many channels, so much of content, people didn't really know what to do. And then similarly in satellite also, we had one satellite which could still fulfill, and today we have hundreds of satellites and it still can't fulfill. So where is the gap? What happened? If you look at Netflix, what has happened? We used to watch only movies. We had like the James Bond or some really special guys, and the movies were all hovering around them. But what has changed today? The change today is you have boutique screens, you have boutique movies, people we do not know, but they have very good talent, extremely good talent. And you can be glued to the TV with the serials. You really do not know their names, from where they have come. It's happening everywhere. Many, many more channels are coming up with really new entrants and people who are not multi-millionaire paid, and that is where I think the satellite imagery industry is also moving. We are having new players, new satellites, new data. So my question is, how do I get access to all this info? How do I get people to use all this data? But it's not about giving accessibility, but also about letting people have that understanding, training people to utilize that data. If you want to buy software, and there are many ways of getting software, the moment you start using some software in a very in third world countries, it's so difficult to find licensing. You have to pay so many hundreds and thousands of rupees, rupiah, and others to get hold of a software. Today in COVID, you can't even have access. You need to, so if you want to train these people, get the people to use the data, extract information, and that's where you don't really need very high-end people to do everything. You need people with skill sets who can develop sequentially and then build the capability to extract more information. The more they have people the trained to extract the information, the more the usage will be. Same as the TV industry, the more you have arts and artists and writers, you will have more content. The more content, the more channels, and so on. So this is again a very, this industry is moving in the same direction where we need to make it available. So at EO Factory, one of the vision is that we want to open it up in such a way that people can have access to technology, people can have access to the workflow, so they can create their own workflows to be able to extract information. And we train people. So we don't train people to just use click here and you get this, click here and get, no, this is not what we want. We want people to understand how they are getting the information, why they are doing what they are doing. So we believe that we have spent in the last 1.5 years to build this factory. We call it factory because it's Earth observation factory. And any AI work requires a factory because you need training data sets, you need, as Clinton mentioned, you need unsupervised classification, you need all the tools. So we have built all these tools into the platform so that hundreds of people can use it, and not just one or two. And people can start from free, they can test it, they can use it in their functions. So we make it very affordable and usable. So that is where I think the industry will see a change, and we are seeing a change. Believe me, we are seeing a change. We are seeing the way people are utilizing it, the way people are accepting it. And people, some of the people need only information, some of the people need the tools to utilize the platform, some of the people just need the dashboards. So there are multiple types of users, multiple types of talent, and we want to build as much talent as possible to be able to extract information from satellite imagery. That is what our goal is. For the last 8 years we have been building, and we have been using AI. We are bringing new technology into the platform for people to learn how to even build AI algorithms and be able to utilize more their skill sets, who are not able to go and study these in the universities, in the top level universities, but they can still be part of this. So I think with this, as Dr. Motoyuki mentioned, that they have the perspective, yes, they have the data. If we open this data, it does not have to be free. We can have people like us can work together to actually use the tools, create information, and then this information can then be shared to the world, and then people can help you to understand how more to use it. So there are many people who want to teach. There are people who want to share knowledge. So I think this is the right time. More data, more knowledge, more workers. People can extract information. They don't just do only data entry and data curation. So I think with this, I would say that this industry is going through a change, rapid change, and we are all excited to be part of this change, and we will continue to build this industry to become better data scientists. So that's our goal.
Thank you, Abe. I think you have a very interesting business model. It's not just focused on monetizing your services, but I think you are speaking in a sense about democratizing AI even as you provide your service. And I like the way you said, train people to use the data and extract the data by empowering them. I think this is great. Now, in the interest of time and as moderator, I need to, divide and conquer. So the next questions, I will be more directed. This questions will be directed to Yana and to Clinton. Subsequently, there will be commercial questions that I will direct to the other speakers. So the next question is, the market is obviously driving up the value chain, as we have heard from the various speakers in the industry. There seems to be a noticeable shift, say from government-owned and government-led to one that is government-backed and industry-led. Now, what do you think must be the role of government and commercial players for Earth's observation to be made sustainable? Maybe I ask Yana to start and Clinton to comment.
Well, coming from the US and from NOAA. Certainly, Clinton could also lean on that experience from the US, of course, as well. We've definitely seen that government providing public funded data as open data really drove business. You know, when our weather data was made available for free, it really generated massive weather enterprise. So private sector then developed the services based on that open public data. And yes, indeed, in the United States, there is a culture of government contracting with the private sector, thereby buffering against the various risks and enabling the innovation in the private sector, sort of guaranteeing certain uptake, etc. That model may not be as easily transferable to all parts of the world. And I see where you're going with this question. It's a tricky one to answer definitively. And I think that is really where our challenge lies currently, is how do we spur innovation, growth in this innovation that is motivating the industry to step into this role and innovate without really being too cautious with risk taking. And I think it's not just the governments that we really need to be, it's not just the government and the private sector that we need to be talking to. I think for us, the challenge is to bring other parties into this conversation, including the finance sector, because risk is all around us, right? I mean, which risk do we look at? Is it the risk of not innovating, or is it a risk of what that translates to in terms of the catalysms that are impacting everything, that are impacting the private sector and the public sector, the people, us, life on Earth. So I think with risk being all around us, our ability to calculate and inform about the risk and close that uncertainty gap, which means we need to be working with the financiers and the funding sector, and so the insurance and the reinsurance and the development and the philanthropists. And look, I think we find ourselves today in an unprecedented momentum where all of these parties are very much willing to participate in this conversation with climate finance and sustainable finance, with regulations in Europe being put on financial institutions to actually disclose their climate-based risks. All of this will drive the demand, not just for data and information, but for continued investment in this. So I think for us to truly crack this nut, because the government is not going to be able to back those risks everywhere forever, right? I think we really need to step into that zone where we're bringing these multi-sectoral conversations. So we in Geo, for example, are beginning to create space, inviting the finance sector to talk about how Earth observation can, in fact, inform risk assessment. And what does that mean in terms of insurance companies being able to develop and provide the right kind of product that can then buffer against the risk in agriculture and other industries. So I think the paradigm has to shift. And it's not just government contracting the private sector, thus buffering that risk. But we're sort of entering a whole new era of having to manage that risk and finance that risk and de-risk, because the global risk is certainly far greater, and we're seeing it. I mean, just what happened in the US with the floods and that hit, it's just, I won't go there, but that's really what we're up against. So over to Clinton.
It's an interesting question when you look at the licensing regime in governments around the world in terms of availability of data sets and what can be sold. There's issues of national security that come into play there. And so I think one of the economic term is crowding out. Like, how do you facilitate an industry without then crowding it out and preventing that industry from actually performing based on your participation? Right. So if you look at the lower resolution, 1 kilometer type, or even like the 30-meter type data sets, that's typically been where the government has been playing, and now you have the 10-meter European satellites that are publicly available. One of the interesting things that I've seen is, you have with the high resolution platforms, they need an anchor customer, and so otherwise they just won't survive. Right? They just early on they need someone to guarantee that they're going to buy that data, and typically that's been various military organizations, depending upon where you are, which ones. And I'm not going to go down that path now, but one of the things that happens as a result is that commercial entities can't get access to data because it's all being purchased by the government. And typically on the high resolution side, it'll be all military purchases. So you may put in a request for an area to have a custom image collected for an area, and this is more in the more stable mapping platforms, I should say. And they'll say, well, you're not going to get that for 6 months because that's close to a military area of interest, and it doesn't matter what your application is. It's going to be very difficult to get that data. So at one hand, those government purchases are enabling those commercial satellites to operate. On the other hand, they're stopping a true commercial market from developing because they're consuming too much of it. And it's a very difficult situation. And how do you balance that, right? So, I mean, that's one of the dilemmas that I've seen. And when we're doing projects, for example, like for carbon sequestration and doing mapping of forests and measuring carbon sequestration rates and how that's impacting various region, and helping get that into the financial markets, if you will, to help finance conservation efforts. We run into that same issue. So we may be trying to save a forest, but it happens to be nearby a military facility, and it's very difficult for us to get that data to do something that one would argue is very much something that's important for the planet. And that it's a big challenge, I think, and there's no easy answer, especially when you're dealing with new platforms that typically the most sophisticated users are within the government. And they do have the expertise in-house, but they know how to work with that data. And there's a period of time where the commercial markets need to develop in order to actually be able to leverage that. So it's that I think that's probably the biggest challenge that the two face, where the government's really been fantastic, in terms, especially in the US, where it's just open data source. And you have like EOSDIS as an infrastructure where there's just making so many different data sets available for lots of different data types, which really has been the foundation of a lot of the remote sensing technology. And similarly with you have the Sentinel program now out of Europe that's been done an incredible job also of expanding that and taking that to another level with a lot of atmospheric measurements and pollution measurements, which now you start to see in the daily news. And how do we start to take those data sets, like for example pollution data sets, and turn them into commercial products that people will pay? So if we wanted to look at say gas leaks or economic activity in different regions, how starting to leverage that data, and that becomes much more of a commercial use case, which was facilitated by that initial government research. And I mentioned the hyperspectral data. That's the next one that's coming, I would say, right? There aren't any hyperspectral satellites operating, but that all started out of the University of Colorado and NASA back in the early 90s. And that was all research. And that data set is incredibly valuable and has a lot of commercial opportunities, both for resource exploration as well as environmental monitoring and conservation, measuring carbon sequestration rates, monitoring agricultural production. There's so many things that can come out of a hyperspectral platform. And we just have to be careful that we give the commercial markets sufficient space when government programs, when that technology is out there and the government doesn't crowd out or consume all of the product and not leave anything available for the commercial entities to start to learn and experiment and develop.
Thank you, Jana and Clinton. I think you have touched a very important point about the role of the government. I mean, the fact that the government play a part in regulation, in regulatory regime, in policy regime, in licensing regime, will help the responsible and peaceful use of space so that the Earth can benefit out of it. And I think you're right. Satellite programs are huge, complex, and takes a long time to develop. You need an anchor customer in the government, but once they can start it, I think the industry will be able to take it to its logical conclusion. So I trust that this will give a new perspective to how developing and developed countries are now beginning to connect the dots to make themselves to be a responsible players in this field. Next question is about commercialization, and I'm going to direct it to Abe and to Dr. Moto. What can commercial satellite companies do to foster the creation and the accessibility of good training data sets? This is about what I've said earlier on about democratizing AI. But how can these data sets be made readily available in order to help generate more accurate AI models that benefits everybody? I know data has been touched upon just now by Abe, but that's a question I'd like to ask those who are in the industry, starting from Abe and Moto. And if we have a little bit of time, I'll ask Clinton to make a comment before we go to the next questions. Okay?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think this is a win-win situation for both commercial companies and the analytic players. What is happening is a lot of commercial satellite companies are also moving up the value chain to deliver analytics. So they are holding on to their data. So when they hold on to their data, it is very difficult for other commercial companies, analytic companies, to actually create training data sets on their data. AI is not general. AI is very specific to imagery, it's very specific to resolution, it's very specific to a lot of factors, the atmospheric condition and the way you process it. So even on the same AI model may not work on the similar type of image in a different location and different environment. The building structures are different. So if you were to do certain AI work, you need to continuously train. And if you are not trained on a specific sensor, you are not able to go and deliver. If a customer is buying that sensor, you are not able to deliver the analytics, because a lot of the analytic companies are thinking out of the box to build more robust solutions. Now, holding on to the data and keeping it within themselves will only help their own cause. So, but then they cannot serve the entire market. So that is where we say that if you want to democratize, you really have to work hand in hand. You should not, because the data is, you should not hold on to the data, because the data is changing every day. A lot of the data is also available on open domain like Google and Microsoft, and everyone have a lot of data. But when you want to create and you want to have sequence of information coming out from a specific type of data, then you should work hand in hand with the commercial companies. I think both will gain, and nobody is going to use the old data to deliver a project. And people need to create training data sets. The more the training, the more accuracy, the more you are better equipped with that, you are able to address customer solutions much faster. The most important part is feeling the trust between the data provider and the analytical company. If there is no trust, it doesn't work, because people still believe that they must hold on to the data because it is very, very much owned by them. So I think this perspective will change and should change. And in the next maybe couple of years, with more and more satellite providers with cheaper price are going to flood the market, then everyone has to open it, and then only who is successful will depend on who can actually deliver insights much faster, much easier.
Dr. Moto, what's your view on this?
Yeah, so I have a little bit different perspectives. Almost part is I agree with Abe's opinion, and take open data is yes, it's kind of a horror word for a data provider. So we, of course, we cannot provide the data freely. So yeah, the governmental entity, I think they have to design the open data platform carefully. And I think the threshold to provide the free data and commercial data is, yeah, depends on the, so maybe the resolution or the freshness of data. So almost a business user want to get the fresh data to make decision on time immediately, especially for financial players. But on the other hand, basically governmental users or academic researchers want to know about the time series information or time series analysis. They want to do that. So archive data is powerful for them. And archive data actually, yeah, it can make the profit for the data providers, but I think the storage cost of the data, how can I say, take pressure, big pressure for the startup company to doing the satellite operation business. So maybe, how can I say, after 5 or 10 years later. So I think the governmental entity can design the open platform as a universal service for everybody, and then they can procure the data set continuously from the satellite data provider. Maybe it's not, how can I say, for 20 or 30 years, it doesn't need. But the early, how can I say, early stage for startup companies to support them, the governmental users, governmental entity, procurement the data, archive the data continuously, and then yeah, they can use that for disaster mitigation service or some of the other services, I think. And yeah, as yeah, in the different viewpoint, as Abe said, you said that yeah, the many satellite operators expand their business, including the analytics for their business, because the value of the data is detected information or insight for the customers. So they expand their business, and I think the future in this direction is connected with API. I mean, the many platforms will be connected by through the API, and the key player in this market is going to be I think service provider, not data provider. So they know the customer needs very well. So for example, the construction consulting company or any other service providers for the specific domain, business domain, so they know that customer needs deeply. So they can arrange the many data set, many type of a data set, and many type of analytics instead of the customers, and then they can provide the information on dashboard or cloud-based solutions like that. So I think there will be many data analytics company or data platformers existing in this market, and some of the portal solution providers for the specific customer domain will provide their service to this each of the market, I think. So that's a little bit complicated to answer.
Yes, no, but I think Dr. Moto, you mentioned it correct. Yes,
can I just clarify one thing? Was that I mentioned about training data, not all data, because not all data can be provided free. only training data. Yeah,
Yes, yes,
not
sure,
yeah.
sure.
Because David's question was on training data availability for building AI models. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and can I just add one quick point?
Yes, Clinton, yes.
I mean, there's a saying in the industry that satellite imagery is like fish. It has to be fresh, right? And so if the data is old and there's no commercial market for it, to your point, Dr. Moto, then that's where I think we can make, industry, if they made those data sets available for training and creating models, it would spur a wide range of innovation and enable a lot of new applications to be developed. And the big plus for the operator is that if people build models using their specific platform, whenever they have actual paying customers, they're going to need to use that same platform. So it actually creates a future demand for their product by making the older data sets available. I agree, it can't be the current stuff, but if it's a couple of years old, 2 years old, then they're not going to sell it anyway. And then you say if you want to sell it, then it has to be a license. But for training only, give it away.
Yeah, that's well said. Well said. Thank you. Well, I'm mindfully aware we have 5 minutes to time. So we have touched on the new space. We have gone to the government side of the house. We've gone to commercial. It leads me now to the last questions before I open up to the 34 people who are hearing us, whether they have any questions for us. So I'm going to direct this to Yana. The only questions that we have not touched on is talent development. And I'd like to ask this question: how can we as a community in the global ecosystem contribute to building the next generation of space-based centric leaders with the skill sets to push technologies to develop what I would call the next frontier for comms, navigations, and awareness for humanity? So Yana, would you like to kickstart before the rest to see whether we have time for this? Let's take a stab at it.
Well, I'll be really keen to hear how these individual companies are building this succession planning and talent development into their strategies. From my vantage point, Geo, which is a collection of over 120 governments and 160 organizations, our ability to drive that really depends on sort of these strategies being built into the institutions or organizations that comprise our membership. But having said that, we are putting a heavy emphasis on youth engagement through the Geo platforms, through the Geo network. We are keenly aware of this talent, and youth being engaged in STEM and space sector is very distributed and differently distributed across the globe. And we have pockets where it's very, comparatively robust, and then we have pockets where, it's comparatively low. So our work in starting actually from last year, but especially this year, is to create robust youth engagement within Geo by way of creating sort of partnerships with organizations like Youth Mappers and several others that have paved the way. One thing I loved when Abe was giving his first intervention is how many times he used the word people. And it is really about the people. He may have used it in a different context, but everything we talked about really hinges on our ability to connect with some champions, be it in the government, in the industry, in education institutions. So to be able to connect with the like-minded people, to create that human interoperability, to then drive youth engagement, create mentoring opportunities. I hear from our youth who say, look, we've been so active, and yes, we like to come together and exchange our ambitions and aspirations, but we want to land a job in the end. So, and it's true, it's also, it's not an infinite capital, right, their energy. So we really need to think about how we're creating these pathways for them to get exposure, for them to be heard, but also then for them to be accepted into opportunities in a more equitable way, so that it doesn't depend on where they are and what infrastructure already exists. And I think in large part, it does become the question to the specific companies and to the specific institutions, while we here try to create the enabling environment and keep this topic at the forefront of our discussions about the sustainability, because youth is the protagonist of change.
Indeed. Well, I'm aware we are 1 minute to time, so perhaps one of the other speakers, you would like to make comments about this talent development?
Yeah, I don't mind, because I think what Yana mentioned about youth is the protagonist of the change, and I can see that everywhere. How important they feel in terms of telling what are you doing with our planet. What are you doing? What is happening? What is how is the environment changing? What can we do? And I think this is an important change we can see. The awareness is very high. Most important is awareness. If the awareness is there, people will accept change, people will embrace change. And what all these satellite companies have done has tremendous impact on awareness. What Google has done actually is created that whole world mosaic, which actually people can see what's happening. Some people have even come to us saying, yesterday there was a robbery in my house, can you find the robber? Because they can see up to the house level. So the awareness has increased, people really know. So I think, as she mentioned, youth is the protagonist of change. It is actually true. So if we can empower the youth, give them the tools, give them the ability to understand the planet Earth better, I think we are already creating a revolution in the geospace, with Earth observation playing a key part in deriving information.
So thank you. I know I would love to carry on and to engage this wonderful minds together with the 33 of our guests who are listening to us. But let me just conclude by saying that it has been a very fruitful time spent with this distinguished panelist on the subject of catalysts for Earth observation. In many ways, for what they speak and where they come from, and in the marketplace and in the community, they are already contributing as catalysts in what they are doing. And I'd like to close this segment with a stark remark that where we live, our cities are actually the frontier where the battles to achieve the global sustainable development agenda over the next decade will be won or lost. We can't lose this battle. We need evidence-based approach for informed and inspired decision-making in how we are maximizing resources in Mother Nature without having the need to destroy it in the process. I think Earth's observations offers opportunities to provide timely, spatially disaggregated information that supports the living creatures like you and I on this Earth. Let me close with a quotation to Maulova. Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed. Awareness of both will ensure that we will live today without destroying the world for our next generation. So on this note, I want to thank all the panelists. You have been an inspiration to us, and I thank you. I pass it on back to the host.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
So thank you all for tuning in to the webinar today. Before you go, please check out our events by scanning the QR code and join the conversation using the hashtag SgGeoFest. So thank you, and we hope to see you again.
Bye-bye, everybody.